Hi everyone, it's Megan Joaquin. Thank you for coming to our second class. Today's class is on assertiveness. So we're going to be talking about what it is, how to use it, and why it's a valuable skill for both adults and children to have. Okay, so today's commitment is, for the rest of the class, I'm going to focus on what I want instead of what I don't want. So today, what we're going to determine is how to let our children know what we want them to do instead of what we don't want them to do, and how to say that in a way that they can understand. Okay, so the first power that I'd like to discuss is the power of attention. And this is that what you focus on, you get more of. So if you spend a lot of your time focusing on how often your husband is on his phone, or how often your children leave their shoes on the floor, you're probably never going to miss the next time that they do that. You're never going to miss that opportunity to be annoyed by it. But if you are spending a lot of your time noticing when your husband pulls out his phone to scroll through Facebook again, or when your children leave their shoes in the middle of the carpet where everyone can trip on them and it's a hazard to everyone again, you might miss the times when your husband is being helpful, when he's playing with your kids, when he's making them laugh, when he's trying to make you laugh, when he's being silly. You also might miss the times when your children clean up their toys without being asked, or when they're getting along and they're playing really well, or you might miss them organizing all of their toys in a really cute and really nice and impressive way. So what we need to do then is we need to figure out how we can shift our attention to focusing on what we actually want to happen. Too often as adults, we focus on exactly what we don't want. And that's usually characterized by us saying, don't leave your shoes on the floor, or don't look at your phone. Instead, what we should be saying is, put your shoes away, or can we talk instead of you looking on your phone? Okay, so the following clip that I'm going to show you, I think, is a brilliant example of assertiveness. You'll notice throughout the video that the woman is, well, she never really raises her voice. She only raises her voice to the extent that, well, so she can be heard over the sounds of all the other people who are basically trying to get her to stop talking. Additionally, she never seems out of control. She continues in a calm, measured voice until she finishes getting her point across. So let's go ahead and watch this brilliant example of assertiveness.
So my question is, Senator Trucco, did you have Tricia Stanley murdered?
Are you out of your mind?
Your Honor, this has gone on long enough.
Did you convince your tenant, Linda Morelli, to testify that Tricia Stanley was killed by her boyfriend, David Allen?
You're way off base. I recommend you rein this in.
Explain why your eviction suit against Miss Morelli was dropped despite her inability to pay rent.
Cheating?
Is it because her lost rent money was nothing compared to the millions you made once Miss Stanley was out of your way? Answer the question, Senator.
Enough.
Why was Linda Morelli granted these concessions?
Mr. Chief Justice, I have extended great deference to the court by showing up here today, but I am not going to put up with this any longer.
I am sorry, Senator, if you do not have the time to answer for who bore the real cost of your development.
Objection!
Not just Tricia Stanley and her boyfriend, David Allen, who served 21 years in prison.
Your Honor, please.
For the thousands who were displaced in the name of lining your pockets.
Keating?
The majority whom were poor, powerless, and didn't bear the color of skin desirable to your business interests. You tore a community apart. You tore families apart. You destroyed lives, Senator. Admit it. Admit you killed Tricia Stanley and had my client, David Allen, set up for her murder.
That is enough. You hear me? You say another word and they'll have no choice but to throw you in jail.
Okay, so shifting gears. Imagine that you are at the park with your two children, or your child and they have a friend. And they disagree because they both want to go down the slide and they're having a hard time taking turns. They're having a hard time determining that one person can go first and the other can go after, and they're fighting about it. You see your son reach up and you know, oh no, he's about to hit. He's going to hit him because he's mad and he wants his way, and all the other reasons that children use to decide when to hit and why. And so you're like, oh no, I got to stop this. And you're standing a little bit, far away, at least, not far enough where you could probably jump in that 1 second to stop the hit. So you yell out to your son, stop it! Don't hit! Stop hitting your brother! Or stop hitting your friend! And, likely your child hears your scary voice and they're probably going to stop, give you a deer in the headlights look. But chances are they're going to hear you and they might, think about it for a couple of seconds. And then they look over and they'll look over at their friend or their sibling and they'll think, And probably what they're going to do next is they're going to hit them. And then the other child's going to cry. And then they're probably going to push past them and go down the slide. I feel like probably a lot of you have lived that situation. I know I have. So when I was yelling the words, stop it, don't hit, what did you hear? I mean, you probably heard all the things that, weren't supposed to happen. But the question that I have is, what are the children supposed to do? So think, for example, that you're at work and let's say you're an electrician and so you're rewiring a house. Now, I'm sorry if this analogy isn't very correct. I do know very little about electricians, but bear with me. So imagine you're helping rewire a house and you go to stick one of the wires into a port, and one of your coworkers calls out, no, stop, don't do that. I mean, probably you're going to stop, right? Because, you don't want to be electrocuted. But do you know what to do? I mean, because you stop, and that's all you know how to do, is stop. But what are you supposed to do next? Who knows, right? And, I mean, lastly, when this coworker yells at you, how does it feel? It probably feels, a little scary at first because you're like, oh no, I'm going to die. And maybe you can recover from that initial, ooh, that scared me feeling pretty quickly, or maybe you can't. And maybe your children can recover from that initial feeling quickly, or maybe they can't. So when we tell our children not to hit, what are we telling them to do? Nothing, right? We're just telling them not to hit. But what should they do instead? That's what they keep wondering. And, okay, I just would like to point out that children understand things really, really slowly. So even when, you try more to give suggestions or things like that, we gotta have a lot of patience with them because they understand things really slowly. And they're also really terrible at coming up with solutions, and they're terrible at coming up with ideas of what to do, and they do it way slower than adults. So that's just another thing where we just kind of have to bear with them on it. Okay, so let's go back to the scenario of your two children on the slide, and they're fighting. At this point, okay, we already lost out on that opportunity. One already hit the other's crying. Okay. Not much we can do there in terms of prevention. But what can we do for next time? Well, what we can do is we can talk to the children and we can try and figure out how to give them the skill so that next time when they're struggling with the slide, and pretty likely for us the next time will probably happen in about 2 minutes, so they'll have a chance to use this new skill right away, is we can tell them what they can do instead of hitting. So you can turn to your son, that we'll call him the hitting son, And we'll say, wow, you really wanted to go down the slide. When you want to go down the slide, then you need to say, may I have a turn, please? Or, can I have a turn? You know how many words your children can speak. You know how verbal they are. If you really need to shorten it, if for me, for example, I would probably tell my 3-year-old daughters to say something like, when you want to turn on the slide, then you first need to wait and then say, okay, my turn, please. This is a great way to set children up to ask for turns. And really, you're gonna have to practice this with them a lot. You're not necessarily gonna have to practice this with them a lot right now, but you're gonna have to practice this with them a lot over the course of their life, because they'll probably do it once right after you tell them, and they'll do it perfectly, and then they probably won't do it again after that until you prompt them again. But it's really important that we are teaching our children what kind of words to use when they want something. Because we want our children to understand that, while hitting may be fast, and it might be a way to, say, stun someone into not moving so we can push past and go down the slide, it is not the best way to retain a friend, but also to be able to go down the slide. And really, all children, all human beings, I think, like the idea of being able to do the fun activity they want without damaging their friendships. Okay, now I absolutely love sharing this quote with people because honestly, this is kind of mind-blowing. And this is specifically accurate to children ages 5 and under. So a young child's brain is unable to consistently understand the not part of do not. This inability to understand don't touch, don't yell, don't hit often results with them simply hearing touch, yell, hit. And you get, guess what? More touching, yelling, and hitting. So have any of you ever had an experience where you're at the store and you go into the home section and say there's like a big fancy vase or some kind of, fancy fragile thing. And of course your child's immediately drawn to it because it's big and beautiful, and children seem to have an innate sense for what is fragile and what is expensive, and that is what they are drawn to. Don't know why. And so they reach up and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to touch this beautiful thing. And so of course, you start panicking. You're like, I don't want to have to pay like $100 for this vase that I didn't even want. Oh my gosh. So then your first reaction is, wait, no, don't touch. And then what does your child do? Probably they touch it, right? So about 6 months ago, I took my daughter to the park, and we met up with some friends of ours. And while we were there, the friends of ours, they told their son not to do something. I don't exactly remember what. Maybe it was something like, don't go down the slide on your stomach. I don't know, something specific, something to keep him safe. And after they said, no, don't do that, he looked at his parents for a few seconds, kind of gave them that look of, okay, I'm listening. And then he immediately went and did whatever it was that they told him not to do. And I just remember his dad commenting to me. He's like, oh my gosh, he does that all the time. Every time we tell him not to do something, he always does it. And I just got to say, I loved that so much because you know what? My friend might not realize it, but his son is super obedient. If he's constantly doing all the things that his dad says to not do, it's because he thinks his dad is saying, yes, please do it. And he wants to make his parents happy. So for those of you who have children just like that, who every time they hear do not, immediately do it, then congratulations. You have super obedient children, and they probably really, really love you. So then, what do we need to do? Clearly, we need to learn how to talk to our children in a way that they can understand. It's easy to tell them, okay, oh, don't touch that vase. But what are we supposed to say in a way that they can understand that also means don't touch this vase? Okay, so let me give you an example. You could say, keep your hands away from the vase. I also like to have the word far. So I say, keep your hands far away from the vase. Or you could say, touch your pants. Keep your hands in your pockets. Clap. You can really just suggest to them any activity that you know would keep them far away from touching that really expensive and probably ugly vase. Okay, so now my big question for you is, what do you want from your children? I mean, I know you don't want them to punch and kick each other. I know you don't want them to scream at you for candy all the time. And I mean, there's any number of things that you don't want them to do. But what do you want? Okay, so in the next slide, I have a little bit of an activity that I would like for you to do. Okay, so I want you to look at this. I call this, I want my children to. So I'm going to explain it, and then I would like you to pause this video for 10 minutes and to get a piece of paper or something, and I want you to write down 5 examples of what you want your children to do. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and explain. So I want my children to play gently with their toys, and you can kind of keep this next part in your head, not slam them against the ground. But if you see your child, say they're taking their, I don't know, their Barbie, and they just keep pounding it against the ground for whatever reason because they love it, and you're like, oh no, that Barbie's gonna break, its head's already fallen off, you know, they're gonna really mess it up, and I know they're gonna be sad. And so you as a parent thinks, okay, well, I obviously don't want my child to cry over this Barbie, and I don't want them to continue damaging it because I know they're gonna regret it. So you might think, okay, I'm gonna tell them, hey, don't throw your toy on the ground. If your child's already enjoying the activity, they're going to take it as more encouragement to throw their toy on the ground. So what can we tell them? Okay, so we think, okay, I want them to play gently with their toys, so I would say, hey, why don't you throw your Barbie in the air? I mean, they are less likely to damage it that way. Or you can suggest that they play with other toys. Or why don't you say, hey, why don't you give your Barbie a bath? Or why don't you put your Barbie to sit on a chair? Okay, next one. I want my children to put their cups in the sink, not throw them. Okay, so what can we tell them then? We would say, okay, I want you to put your cup in the sink. I want you to walk to the sink and put your cup in. Now, I would like to say that pretty much at any point in life, except for maybe with your teenagers, go ahead and show your children what you want them to do. If you want them to put their cup in the sink without throwing it, then go ahead and say, okay, this is what I want you to do. Pick up a cup, walk it over the sink, put it in gently. Children love being shown exactly what to do because it gives them confidence. It helps them see, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Teenagers might find it a little patronizing, unless, of course, you do this for more complicated things than putting the cup in the sink. Next one. I want my children to play wrestle safely with their siblings, not punch or kick during the wrestling. So you notice your kids, you know, they're starting to wrestle, they're grabbing each other's shoulders and neck and all that. And, you know, you've seen this happen a million times before, so you know that at first they love it and they're both like laughing wildly and it's just amazing. 3 minutes, and then somehow someone punches or kicks or bites the other really quickly or pinches, and suddenly it's dissolved and, you know, they want to be in a fist fight and they hate each other. So you're wondering, okay, how can I tell them what I'd like for them to do? Well, once you can either, when you first see them starting to wrestle, you can say, okay, you can wrestle or you can fight or whatever word you use for it. You can wrestle, but if you feel like punching or kicking or biting, then you need to put your hands in your pockets, or you need to put your mouth like this. You just, ultimately with children, you need to always show them what to do. Because like I mentioned earlier, children are terrible at thinking of ideas. And they're terrible at coming up with solutions. But they get less terrible at thinking of solutions and less terrible at coming up with ideas when their parents are consistently really good at giving them examples. Okay, so now what I would like you to do, get your paper, go ahead and write, I want my children to, on the top. And I want you to think of 5 things that happen a lot. So in my house, for example, lately my daughter has been kind of demanding. And so she'll randomly be like, I want a cereal bar. And she might scream for it because she's 3 and, you know, there's a lot going on in her brain. So sometimes it's hard for her to manage it. So in that instance, I have to think about, okay, what is it that I most want here? Do I want my daughter to not scream? Do I want her to get the cereal bar herself? Or do I want her to just eat an apple instead of cereal bar? That's the first thing I have to identify. Personally for me, the most important thing I want is I want her to not scream, I want a cereal bar. So then I would tell her, okay, Blair, I will let you have a cereal bar, but next time I want you to say, I want a cereal bar, or can I have a cereal bar? She is only 3, and I would recommend that for children 5 and under. You don't worry as much about whether the question or the phrase that they use is specifically really polite, you know, as in, may I have a cereal bar, please? Because they're still really trying to master language. That right now, the thing that most matters is, at least for me in this instance, what for me most matters is that she is focused on what kind of tone she is using. Because likely she's probably not even aware that she just screamed. And if I point out to her, she'd probably deny it because she just is unaware. So I would say, okay, next time I want you to tell me, I want a cereal bar in a small voice. And sometimes kids need, you know, small voice, little voice, quiet voice, whisper voice. And then I would show her, I'd say, okay, so say it like, I want a cereal bar, please. Usually I add please, but I usually don't require. I don't require it as often because, like I said, children, young children are still trying so hard to master the language that it's not always the most important thing. So go ahead and write down your 5 examples and really focus on what you want them to do instead of what you don't want them to do. So if you're writing something and you're putting something like, ooh, I want my children to not break all my stuff. Pause and then think about, okay, that's a little broad. Okay, and then maybe you can narrow it down to, there was this time that my child broke my watch. I want my children to not break my watch, but then you have to think, okay, he broke my watch because he picked it up, because he jumped on my bed and then he climbed my dresser and he got up there and then he dropped on the floor. So then probably the main thing that you would look for is, I want my child to not climb on my dresser. So I want you to write a way of how you're going to tell your child, you know, instead of, I want my children to not break all my stuff, you say, I want my child to, and then next is, I want my child to not climb my dresser, but we're going to put it in a way where we're not using the words not and do not, because children don't really get that. So it's, I want my child to stay on my bed, or I want my child to keep his feet on the floor, or I want my child to stay on the ground. Okay, take 10 minutes, write 5 examples, and go. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that activity. I hope it was helpful. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about assertiveness. So we've been talking a lot about, about how to phrase things in a way that our children can understand. So how do we drive home to them that these things are important and that we really think that we should do them? Well, assertiveness is how we teach children that words have more power than hitting. So we must be assertive with our children in order to teach them how to be assertive with each other. I just want to state, It's super, 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 super normal for children to hit others when they feel threatened. It's especially normal for children under 5. I mean, they're all trying to master language. Words come out way slower than it takes them a lot longer to, formulate a spoken paragraph than it does to hit whoever it is that's scaring them, or who, is threatening to go down the slide first, or threatening to play with their toy. So if you have a child that hits a lot or kicks a lot or sometimes bites, it's not a reflection of you as a bad parent or an uninvolved parent. It's normal. That doesn't mean that, you are powerless to help them find ways to, to lessen the amount of kicking and punching and biting that they might do. But just so you know, every child ever is going to do some of that, and whether your child kicks, punches, or hits more, or bites, that's genuinely up to your child's personality. Really, every child. It's normal. Okay. So here I have some examples of an assertive voice versus a passive voice. So likely a lot of us tend to speak in a passive voice. For me, learning how to use assertiveness was pretty hard because I had a really hard time separating the thought of assertiveness from being mean. So assertiveness is not the same as aggressiveness. Being aggressive is mean. Being assertive is not. Aggressive is bullying. Aggressive is a threatening dog. Assertive is being serious. And assertive is saying, this needs to happen. Let's do this. Okay, so here's assertive. It's time to put on your shoes. Do it now. Here's passive. Can you put your shoes on? And I've noticed a lot of parents tend to phrase their commands as a question. So they need their children to put their shoes on because it's time to go, and it's snowing outside, so their feet are going to freeze, and they really can't be outside without shoes on. Yet parents tend to ask us question, can you put your shoes on? I think part of it is because, there was a couple of years in the beginning of their child's life where their child genuinely could not put their shoes on without help. And I think some of us parents kind of retain that, well, can you put your shoes on? Yeah, you can do that. And here's the thing. When you ask your child, can you put your shoes on? Sometimes they're going to think about it. And they're going to start picturing their shoes. And they're going to start picturing themselves trying to put on those shoes. And they're going to think, can I put my shoes on? Yes. But they might not realize that you're asking them to put them on. They think you're wondering if they can. Kind of like when you ask, oh, what's your favorite color? It sounds different from when you tell them, oh, well, your plate is blue. It sounds different than, oh, is your favorite color blue? And it's, it's obviously asking questions of your children is fine. It's great. But it's important that when when it's time to go and it's time for our children to put on their shoes, that they understand that this is something that needs to happen, and it is not, well, it's not supposed to be a conversation starter. Okay, assertive. Clean up your toys. Do it now. Okay, so your daughter gets out all of her magnet toys. She builds something really cool. She gets bored, and she wants to pull out her blocks. So she's left this big mess on the floor, and you don't want 2 big messes on the floor, of course. That's annoying, let's be honest. So you want her to clean it up because really, you want her to learn how to clean up, and 2, you don't want to feel like her slave. So how can you tell her? So you say, clean up your toys, do it now. And you can also let her know, okay, before you get the next toy, it is time to clean up your magnet toys. Do it now. So in the assertive phrasing, there's no questions. There's no question. If your voice is firm, that kind of helps drive home the point that you're really not negotiating this and that it's important to you. A passive way to say that would be, we need to go clean up your toys now, please. Okay, so let's assume that it isn't that you just don't want two messes, it's that your daughter played with toys, but now it's time for her to go to school. So when you use phrases like, oh, we need to go, it makes it sound as if both you and your daughter are powerless to your schedule. And, it's, oh, we need to go. It sounds as if you don't have necessarily some of the power over the situation that you probably should. And here's the thing. I mean, a lot of us, I think, sometimes feel powerless or out of control in situations with our children. That's normal, especially if you have strong-willed children, which my daughter's quite strong-willed. But, even if we feel that way, it's important that we try not to give that impression. And the reason that that's important, I mean, it's fine if our children they realize that as adults, we struggle and we have difficulties and things like that. But when we use phrases where we seem powerless to a situation, it makes it seem as if because we don't have control over it, it's not important to us. And that is not the message that we want to send. We want our children to understand that, whether we have to go or not, or, whether whatever schedule happens or not, it is important that when we make a mess, that we are the ones that clean it up. Okay. Our next assertive. This is your responsibility. Put your backpack away. I love using the word responsibility with children. Or, I mean, you can use similar words that like, this is your responsibility, this is your job, this is your task, this is what you do. However you want to phrase it in a way that works for your child and your child can easily understand. Do it that way. But it lets your child know that that is what they're supposed to do. And it's their job, and you expect that of them. Here's passive. If you clean up, I'll give you a treat. Now, I think that one's a little bit more obvious why it's passive. Because basically we're telling them, hey, I'll reward you for cleaning up your backpack. And now I'm not saying that, you can't reward your children, because by all means, if you want to reward your children, go ahead. But I think the important thing is being intentional about when you choose to reward them. Are you going to reward them for putting their backpack away when it really should have been something that they do on a regular basis without needing help? I mean, then you probably shouldn't. If you want to reward your child because they did all their homework every day for a month, and they worked really hard to make that happen, then yeah, absolutely. The important thing is that between being assertive and being passive is that you're just being very intentional about what you want your child to do and why you want them to do it. And of course, it's always important to maintain that firm voice. Although if you're like me, I don't really seem to have a firm voice. I was once told that when I speak firmly, I sound more like I'm crying. But even still, even though I am a little bit voice challenged, I am still able to speak with assertiveness, because sometimes assertiveness just means repeating something over and over again until our children understand, okay, Mom said this several times. Mom's standing next to the toys, looking at me, looking at her. Okay, this is important to her. All right. If it's important to her, it must be important. Okay. So I want to say, it's fine to say please after making an assertive request, as long as your children understand that this request still has to happen. Sometimes I say, sometimes I'll say to my daughter, okay, it's time to clean up your toys. Do it now, please. I don't always, but I mean, if you feel more comfortable adding the word please after, really, it's fine. As long as when you add the word please, it doesn't sound like whining. And it doesn't sound like you're begging them. Because I think sometimes it can a little bit. It can be like, oh, pick up your toys, please. And that is not what we want. We want our children to understand that we are giving them these responsibilities and we're expecting these things of them because we trust that they can do that, because they are powerful enough to clean up their messes, and that they are smart enough to clean up their messes, and that we trust them to clean up their messes. So kind of when we do that little bit of that begging, really what we're showing is that we don't trust that they'll do the things that we expect of them. And that is not what we want. And really, that's not what our children want. They want to feel trusted. And the thing is that really young kids, they don't know how to verbalize, Mom, when you ask me to do something in a whining voice, it makes me feel as if you don't trust me. Wouldn't that be great, if our kids could just tell us that, and then we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I will say that in a different way. That would make it a lot easier, right? Then we probably wouldn't need child development, studies of child development and parent classes and parent books and, all these things to decode how children think and work and exist. But really that is kind of how it makes them feel. So be intentional, be firm, and be assertive. Okay. But probably the point that I most want to drive home is be conscious of when you are making the assertive requests. Depending on the situation, children sometimes need more patience, support, and time to be able to follow through. So if your child is watching TV and they're right in the middle of an episode, it's going to be really hard for them to just stop watching the episode and go put their plate in the sink. Think of how you would feel if you were watching something on Netflix and it was an episode of a season that you'd been waiting to watch for months, and then you got a call from your boss and he's like, okay, you need to work on this project now. And you're like, oh my gosh. And it would probably be really difficult for you to pause Netflix and to say, open your laptop or whatever it is that you would need, and to start working on it. Probably you'd need a couple of minutes to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that he would just do that. And I'm in the middle of my show and I'm so comfortable under my blanket. I have all my snacks. And you'd probably need a couple of minutes to grumble. The main difference here is that, yes, your boss knows that he's probably calling you at nighttime, but he might not be aware that, you're watching an episode of a long anticipated season on Netflix, and that you are warm under your comfy blanket and you got a bag of popcorn and a soda, and, he doesn't know that. But the advantage that we have as parents is we do know what our children are doing. And even if the episode of whatever our children are watching isn't necessarily long anticipated, even if it's, their 45th time watching an episode of PJ Masks, they might still have that same feeling. Children have a really hard time transitioning between activities, especially when it comes to TV. Man, TV, kids love it. Let's be real, adults love it too. I love it. So what you can do is, there's a couple of ways to kind of help your children make that mental transition. You can say, okay, when this episode of PJ Masks is over, I'm going to pause the TV, or I'm going to turn off the TV, whichever you feel like. And you say, it will be time for you to pick up your plate, and I would recommend pointing at the plate so your child knows what you're talking about. Pick up your plate and walk over and place it in the sink. And that way your child, they may not be happy about it. They might be like, oh, no, I don't want to. But they'll probably whine anyway. So what really matters here is that they do it, right? But their brains, it's going to be so much easier for their brains to transition if they have that warning, and then they recognize that you are kind of giving them that favor of letting them finish watching their TV show. Kind of the hard part of where assertiveness may turn into aggressiveness, or assertiveness might turn into whining, or assertiveness kind of fails, is when we are trying to be assertive with our children at the wrong times. It's, if we were trying to say, okay, you should have cleaned up before you watched TV. Clean up your plate now. And your child's like, no, but I want to watch my show. And, they're really worried about him missing a couple of minutes. If you continue to try and get them to do it right then, they're going to get stressed because likely they don't want to hear your voice. They want to hear the TV. And they're stressed because they're really trying hard to focus on the TV, but they're also, focusing on what you're saying, and they don't want to displease you, but at the same time, they're also really invested in their TV show, and they're really drawn, they're really torn between the two. And so they don't really know, they don't know how to do what they want, but also how to still please you as a parent, and they're going to get stressed out, and likely they're going to yell, or they're going to cry, or they're going to scream or something. And likely you are not going to get the results you want. I understand that not necessarily every scenario is their time for this patience, but I recommend as often as you possibly can. If you want to be assertive in a way that doesn't devolve, then you need to set it up in a way where you can be patient. Assertiveness always requires patience, especially if you have really young children, especially for children under 5. All right, well, that's our assertiveness class for today. Thanks for watching.